Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. So today I'm here at home in quarantine, as probably many of you are experiencing too. Anyway, today I want to talk about the I.33 as the title states, but more in general about training and fighting. What I mean. When we work with our treatise in HEMA, we think about the application of the techniques. So many times when we are approaching a book, for example, let's say Fiore or the I.33 or the Peter von Danzig manual or whatever, we are thinking about how to properly apply these techniques in sparring or in tournament. In fact, when we are reading the technique described in the manual, most of the times, not every time, we are reading a way of training the technique. So it's not always the technique, it's just a way to achieve the goal of applying the technique in sparring or in a fight. So this is slightly different. It means that what we are reading is not the actual technique. Let's say that at 95%, most of the times, the actual technique is described more or less perfectly in the actual gloss. But other times there are differences. So sometimes there are differences that are brought by the fact that you have to train, and not in every period people was training in the same way. What I mean, there are differences in, let's say, even pedagogy, or the way in which people was experiencing training due to the fact that they had different protections. Now, different protections is a really important thing to take in consideration. Even in medieval period, let's think about Fiore and the priest that wrote to the I.33. If for the priest probably was harder to have, let's say, training equipment, for example, padded jacket, basically gambesons. For Fiore, which probably was working in this context and training noble people, having access to this kind of equipment was far more possible. So we have to take also this in consideration when we are reading a manual. So who have wrote the manual and in which context he wrote the manual. This is an important thing to take in consideration, because if the guy which wrote the manual had no access to a gambeson, probably thrusting at the chest of the opponent was less possible, or you had to thrust at the opponent in a more controlled way. So the differences in which people trained in the past brought them to create different systems of training. A different system of training are based on their possibilities, as I have said. But when you write your system of training, you write the system as it is, because you know this stuff. So you can't, let's say, practice one system of training for 10 years and then ask yourself, oh, but maybe in the future, let's say 700 years from now, someone will read this book and he will have masks and whatever, and so they will need to better understand this manual. No, it was impossible for them to think about this, of course. So they were basically writing the system of training as they were practicing in the past. When we pick up our manual, let's say the I.33, we start to think, as I said, about the way in which we want to apply the technique. And when we want to apply the technique, we want that the technique follows the precise glossa that is written in the book, and that it should be closer also to the images, if the images are present on the manual, as close as possible. But sometimes we are exaggerating, especially for the images, but this is something that I don't want to talk about in this video. But the glossa too have this problem. But the glossa have a problem connected with this topic, because we are reading most of the times a glossa which is explaining us how to train this action. The 133 is one of the, let's say, best examples for this kind of topic, because, as I said, not every manual is a training manual. Some manuals are fighting manuals. One example, for example, is Taloffer. Taloffer doesn't explain a thing about training, at least most of the times. It's more focused on the actual action. And sometimes you see cut limbs or whatever. Now, as I said, we don't have to take the images too much in account. But when we don't see any kind of pedagogic part inside of a manual, we can call it a fighting manual. But in the 133, for example, we see a number of times, first of all, we see one person which seems to be a kind of master, which is the priest, and one person which is a kind of trainee, the disciple. We have this kind of situation, which is kind of strange. We see this kind of situation even in other kind of manuals, for example the Fiore manual, but this is another situation again. Anyway, the 133 shows this situation. And we see also a number of times written in the manual something like, so the priest asked to his students to set in a precise way. So he asked the students to set his sword here or there. Or again, for example, there is an example which I really like to point out is at the folio 9V, if I remember well, in which the priest says something like, here the priest is doing this action to let his student understand how to do the next action. So is somewhere like, there. You see, I hope you are watching these images. This is the folio. I don't remember, probably it's the 9V. And here we find this kind of little clues that make us understand, at least that make me understand, that this manual is not only a fighting manual, but is not at all a fighting manual, it's a training manual. It's a manual which explains a way of training the way of fighting with weapons, but it is training in a ways which is really connected with the period, of course, and the instruments that they had in the past to train this kind of art. Anyway, I say in the past, but in the past related to the context. Again, nobles had different tools, but this priest, we don't really know how much tools he had to train this specific system. But what's the point here? Now, we are reading all these clues, and I suggested that if you like 133 to go and pick up your book and try to read it in this way. Try to find all the clues. How much times the priest, the manual states like the priest asks to the student to do this, or the priest sets in this position to let the student do something. This is not something which is about, which is connected with the ego of the priest, because he has to states that he is the master. We can easily understand it, and it's not really in line with even Christian way of thinking. But anyway, we can say that it is not only related with the ego of the priest, which have to show that he is the master, but most of the times this is about letting us understand that this is a training manual, basically. So what this means? This means that not every action is the same as the one we are reading, in terms of application. So let me explain in a better way. Sorry for my bad English. When we are reading our action, we have to think at the action which in theory we would end up carry out in a fight. But at the same time, we have to go through different levels of understanding. So the first level of understanding is how the action is presented in this way. We have said because is a way of training this action. How this action how this exercise can help us training something, and which kind of action we are training. And here I want to introduce you to an example, which is the falling under. Now the falling under, if you don't know, is the first, basically the very first play which is presented to us in the 143. And everyone try to understand how we have to work out our falling under, how it's working, why we are binding with the weak and the strong, or whatever. Now, the fact is that, to me, in the years, I understand that this action, most of the times, it doesn't make sense. It's not really working. But let's think about what I have said. If we think about this manual as a training manual, we understand that people wasn't able to hit themselves on the hands so easily. Because even if you have swords with dull swords, this is a problem, and you know it. Because you probably have experienced it in the past, like me. Anyway, you have to create a system which let you train the action as close as possible to reality. So a way to train, let's say, false edge cut toward the end, or a thrust toward the arm, or something like that, is the falling under. So when you want to train something and you don't have padded jackets, let's say, and you have to train this action, you train it with the falling under. Instead of hitting the opponent hand, you try to hit the opponent strong. And this is a very good idea, because it's close to the actual goal of hitting the opponent hand. In fact, you are hitting a part of the opponent weapon which is very close to the opponent hand, and you can train it at, let's say, faster pace instead of hitting the opponent hand and reducing the speed at the very end of the action. So this is a very good idea, and in fact the 133, the priest that wrote the 133 had an extremely good idea. So this is an example on how to read an action through the system of training in which it is described. The manual shows us an action which is meant to represent something else, and we may end up thinking about all this kind of stuff, the training method, the tools that they had for training the actual action, and which kind of action it may represent. Is the action represented in the manual exactly the same as the glossa? We don't really know. We can experiment a bit, and we don't have to stay as close as possible all the times to the glossa in terms of fighting. Okay? We have to understand what the glossa is teaching us, which is training the action. And this is the way in which they trained the action in the past. So what this means? It means also that if you want to recreate the 133 precisely, you should not recreate a fighting system. You should recreate a training system. So a good way of recreating 133, for example, with following the exact glossa and the exact plays, is let's say dress in a light way, even if historical, precisely made historical clothes, and do the actual plays one by one. So this is the way in which you recreate the 133. But if you want to recreate the way in which you learn how to fight, basically the way of fighting, it's better to say, of which is taught in the 133, you have to do something else, because you have to understand which action is the 133, let's say, teaching to us in every single play. And then, only then, we can understand how to train the actual action that is meant to be achieved in reality by the book. You have to understand this, and you have to work at training a new way of training this action with our tools. Because, for example, in the 133 practice, we see most of the times people which is thrusting at the opponent's head, which have to stop, and then we have to think about this. We have to understand that they had to train a thrust to the opponent's head in a probably extremely careful way. I think also that sometimes they changed some thrust in cuts, because controlling a cut is more easier. And this is again all about training. So you can't, you see that you can't train a precise thrust in a precise way, in a safe way. You say, well, we can train a cut which is similar to this kind of thrust. But this is again another huge topic which I want to discuss here. So let me try to resume the concept. When you approach 133, you have to open your book and you reach the first page, but the first play. It's not the first page. On the first play, you think about what the play is showing. So the play is showing the falling under. How the falling under works. Why is made in this way, and why the opponent is reacting with the shield strike and step, etc. Everything at the really beginning is all weird, complex, and I've heard people stating that 133 doesn't make sense. In fact, yes, if you think about it as a fighting manual, especially, it doesn't make sense at all most of the times. But if you reach the conclusion, yes, it's a training system, it's a training manual. Okay, so this action is meant to train something. My falling under is meant to train something. What I should train with this action? So, what can I do with someone which is presenting himself in half shield against me from this guard, from underarm? I can hit the end, I can hit the arm, I can even go for the chest maybe, or with a thrust. So I can do a number of actions which are safe. Okay, for example, thrusting an arm is safer, is safe. Thrusting the chest over the opponent's arm is quite safe, because I can also close the line with my buckler. So I can train all this action. This image and this glossa are probably representing a way to train this kind of action. This makes sense. Let's check which kind of option we have to deal with this possible action. The defense against the falling under is a counterbind and a shield strike. If someone strikes my arm or my hand, and I can counterbind his thrust or cut? Yes, of course. I can do a shield strike? Yes, but probably I have also to do a step, because he's trying to reach my arm, which is the forward target. So I need to step to do my shield strike, and I have the time to do this? Yes, because my opponent is attacking, and if I catch the correct time, I can parry basically with my counterbind, do a shield strike, and then carry on with my attack. Then there is the next step, in which the priest says that you have also to pay attention, because the one which is falling under is the first that can react to this action. And this is also true, because it greatly depends from the situation. If you are striking to the opponent hand to, let's say, basically hitting the opponent hand, or if you are striking to feint, or just taking the bind, as the manual says, you reach different conclusions, and you reach different and you create different options. But even if you strike toward the opponent's hand to hit his hand, and the opponent parries, you still have time to react, because the opponent have to breach the distance toward you with his steps, and then all the plays that we see in the manuals keep going. So, what this means? This means that from this manual we can reach a new level of comprehension of the fight, and we can do this simply by understanding what the manual is trying to explain us in his own way, namely in his pedagogic way of the beginning of the 14th century, which is completely different from the way in which we do things and think things and practice things right now. So guys, I hope this video will help you. I know that is a complex topic, and I hope to have been clear enough for you to understand this. Well, thanks for watching guys, and as always, see you next time.